Tonight we're going to be continuing our study on Rethinking the Church, James Emery White's book, and we're going to talk about rethinking worship tonight. And I think this is a kind of a difficult subject for many people because we are not people who like change very much. And, that goes for all humans, I think. We don't care about things changing. We like to keep things the way they are, things we're comfortable doing. And sometimes rethinking worship means making changes. But sometimes it just means clarifying who we are and what we're doing. And so we'll move on to the next one there, or you got it up already. I'll tell you what, you're just on the ball there, Austin, I tell you. That's good. But the first thing I want to mention is the King James Bible. Okay, if you ask most people what Bible is probably the most used Bible in churches, it would be the King James Bible. If you look in the pew rack, you'll find a King James Bible there in front of you. King James Bible is a beautiful translation of the original Hebrew and Greek text into modern 17th century English. Okay? So, think about that. That's where the King James Bible comes, but it's not something you can get rid of, because people will swear to you today it's the Bible that Paul carried. Okay? The King James Bible is the Bible that Paul carried. Think about that. Think about that. People will just, tell you it's the only Bible that is a true translation, and that's not true. Many translations, modern translations, have been written. There were translations before the King James, and King James basically just said, I really want to know what all this is about. He wasn't even a Christian. He just wanted to know what all the fuss was about and wanted it translated in something he could read. And so then came the King James, and it's been a beautiful Bible to read from. But as the years have changed, so has the language. Instead of thee and thou, we say you. Instead of whither, we say where. Instead of naught, we say nothing. Instead of speaketh and getteth, we say speak and get. So these are just some of the things that have changed over the years, but it's still, for so many years, it was the only translation of the Bible in English, and so it's still very popular and very loved and in some cases worshipped almost. Every effort, however, to give us a new translation, and we have to be very careful between translations and paraphrases, because there are paraphrases of the Bible that are not very reliable. A paraphrase is simply where a man sits down and reads the Bible and says, oh, here's what it's really saying. Here's what I think it says. But a translation is a true study of the original Greek and Hebrew text. And of course, we don't have the original manuscripts, but we have enough of the original texts that have been handed down and passed down through the years, particularly with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that we know we have everything that we need to say that the Bible we have is genuine. And all these, even the new discoveries of archaeologists that have given us some of those texts, they verify what we already had in Scripture. See, the thing about it is we tend to get really caught up on the science and the study and the research of it all when we forget that it's God who is the author. It's God who's handed down His Word through those who wrote it down over the years. So the idea of having a modern translation is giving somebody something they can read in their own language. It's giving something they can read that they'll understand. So as opposed to, I don't choose to read the German version of the Bible. I don't choose to read the Spanish or the French version. I choose the English version. When you come down to translations, there are many good translations, and I use a lot of different ones for different types of study. So, but the New King James to me is a good modern translation. You know, the New International Version. There are even some more modern ones that don't necessarily dumb down, but they make the reading of the Scripture more simple and easier. They put it on a lower grade level, so to speak. And the result, people are able to read the Bible and understand it. So that's a big deal. That really matters. Let's move. Okay, you got us there. I'm sorry. So the lesson that we learn regarding Bible versions can be applied to worship as well. Okay? So worship is a form of the Anglo-Saxon word worthip, and it literally means worth-ship. And worship is the expression of honor and respect to someone or something. For Christians, it is expressing honor and love to God. So this worship should not only be biblical, but it should be meaningful. God is the object of our worship. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus quoted Isaiah as he prophesied. And Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees. He was really in an accusatory tone. He said, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain." And I think that that's the case in a lot of churches in America today. Probably in other places as well. But there are a lot of Christians who give lip service to the Lord God Almighty, but they really are not living what they're saying. Their worship is in vain because they're only claiming to love God maybe on Sunday morning. The life of most churches is largely built on two false assumptions. Two false assumptions that are seldom verbalized, but they're very influential in modern churches. And the first is that worship should be traditional in its expression. And the second is that it's an event solely for the believer. And as a result, it's irrelevant to non-Christians, non-believers. Now, the word traditional is very subjective, as you probably know. What's tradition for me may not be tradition for you. But the essence of a tradition is universal. The ongoing preservation of a practice from the past. We continue traditions for the sake of traditions often. It's a feeling that only that which is from the past is an appropriate vehicle as worship. As a result, many churches use many of the same things they used decades before when it comes to music, when it comes to attire, the way they dress in church, the way the church looks, the decorations, the clothing, the language. Yet we are usually pretty good about updating our homes. Most people, if they don't, they at least want to update their homes. They buy new appliances, they buy new carpet, they buy new furniture. We try to keep our automobiles updated. We want a vehicle that's, for most people, a modern vehicle, but we want something definitely that's reliable, something that'll get us from point A to point B. So worship should be traditional. And if we think that about worship, why is it that we don't say the same thing about transportation? Instead of a new car, why aren't we still riding the horse and buggy? And the second point, that worship is irrelevant to non-Christians, that is a point that many churches hold, that this is an event for Christians only. And so what non-Christians think and what they believe really doesn't matter. So, this is God's people's time. The Bible teaches that there's one thing that is for God's people only. Who knows what it is? Communion. The Lord's Supper. Exactly. The Bible teaches that that is for God's people. And so we invite those who know Jesus to participate with us in communion. But we don't exclude them from anything else in the church. We don't exclude them from being a part of the worship and the Bible study time, the Sunday school hour, and so forth. But the assumption is that worship's irrelevant for non-Christians. And it goes well beyond the idea of the Lord's Supper. Here's what White said. Those who hold this assumption believe that since non-Christians would have neither the desire nor the ability to truly worship God, it is not important whether they connect with the service at all. It does not matter whether they are able to appreciate the music, understand the ritual, or benefit from the message. The unstated assumption is that worship is for us and not for them. So, that is, that's something that I've been guilty of, and even in planning worship, and I think many times we are when we come together as church. How many people understand our lingo? Non-Christian people who haven't been in church before or for any period of time, how well do they understand the things we're talking about? When we refer to just our bulletin, there's probably terms in the bulletin that they won't understand. We try to make it pretty plain. We've done it here in the order of service, but we still talk about different meetings, different groups within the church that are meeting and doing things, and they are referred to sometimes by initials or and we don't clarify. They're referred to maybe by some terminology that doesn't really tell us who they are. Now, I like using terminology for the classes having their own names, that you identify with that Sunday school class. That's good. But the problem comes in when the non-believer is exposed to that and they don't know what we're talking about. I think what I'm trying to say is we have to be intentional about clarifying ourselves, particularly to those who would be outsiders or who would consider themselves outsiders. I spent a whole semester when I was in graduate school at NC State doing a study on outsider authors. There are so many authors who have written throughout the decades about feeling as though they're an outsider, whether it's because of race or religion or maybe their position in the family. And we read a number of books by a number of authors, and then before the end of the semester we had to basically write our own outsider story, our own personal outsider story. And what I found is that many of us can relate to being an outsider in some circle, in some area. Maybe it's with the in-laws and that family. Maybe it's with a group of co-workers, or maybe it's with your own family. Maybe you feel like an outsider in some area. Maybe it's even within a group in the church. The sad truth is, it takes a lot of courage for a non-believer, for a true outsider to come into the church. And they need to be loved. They need to be shown that there are people who care. They need to have the opportunity to become an insider. And that means intentionally including them, intentionally explaining things to them. And so we get to the point of rethinking worship now, Austin. Rethinking worship. Rethinking the church demands that we ask whether the assumptions that we just talked about are important to us. Are they sound assumptions? Here's what Leith Anderson, the great Sunday school and church guru, has had to say. He said, years of decline had taken a painful toll on a desperate church. What we need, the members said, is a dynamic new pastor. A search committee did everything right to find the perfect leader. He was young but experienced, serious but witty. If anyone could turn this problem-ridden congregation around, he was the man. And when he came and addressed the congregation for the first time, he gave an inspiring description of his qualifications, experience, vision, and plans. And this final line summed up his stirring presentation. He said, "With God's help, I intend to lead this church forward into the 19th century." One of the members of the committee was a little surprised to hear that and said, "You made a mistake. You mean the 20th century." This was a while back. But the pastor then looked at him and said, "We're going to take this 1 century at a time. 1 century at a time." So church members need to ask themselves, and churches need to ask themselves, what century? In what century does our worship reside? I think here at Robert Dale, we are about as modern as any church in our area has gotten. We understand the importance of tradition, but we also understand the importance of including others, of being intentional about explaining who we are and what we're doing, and our music is very, very well blended. We have a good variety. We have a lot of activities for different age groups, and we try to let everyone actively participate in some way in worship. So I think we're doing some good things. Doesn't mean there's not room to grow. But we need to be very careful to understand that the people who are out on the outside, have never been part of church, and more younger people particularly have never been a part of church. For them, even our more modern worship would be a little scary, maybe. When we think of traditional and really, stuck in your way, you may think of Primitive Baptist or something, and say, we've got music, we've got instruments, we've got carpet on the floor and pads on the pews and air conditioning running. But for a lot of people, they've become so accustomed to something different outside of the church that makes us look kind of stuck in our ways. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad. But the problem is, if we are trying to reach those people for Jesus, then we already have a hurdle. Something there that we are going to have a difficult time overcoming. Bob Logan has written that an amazing phenomena took place in the 20th century, and that is that the church remained stuck in forms of ministry and worship that were more culturally appropriate to the 19th century. He said the robes, the pipe organ, the hymnals, the order of worship, the nature and place of the sermon are all vestiges of 19th century culture. And the result is, according to Logan, Bob Logan, is that we have a King James worship in a cyberspace world. King James worship in a cyberspace world. I'm tickled that we have people who are so cutting edge that they're up there every Sunday broadcasting our services for people to see, because a lot of people, that's where they're getting their meat. I mean, they're not coming to church, but they're getting it. And some of them, they're at work. Some of them are in other countries even that are watching from time to time. So we know that we're trying to do some things here that reach out and beyond our own comfort zone often. Certainly for me. Studies indicate that 71% of adults who attend church say that they never experience God's presence during their church's worship service. 71% never experience God's presence. And I don't know about you, but I experience God's presence pretty much every time I walk in this auditorium. And I see it on your faces. And in the love that we all have for one another. And not just when we're worshiping in here, but when we're studying the Bible in the fellowship hall, or when we come together for missions meetings, or whenever we're doing anything around the grounds. Whenever we come together, there's a love and there's a presence of God. Unfortunately, not everybody sees it. I don't know if we did a survey of our congregation what the numbers would be, but apparently, if 71% of American churchgoers are getting no connection to God out of worship, the chances are there are some in our congregation who would say the same thing. And it's scary.
And you wouldn't really mind not going if you weren't getting it.
Yeah, if you weren't getting anything, then you probably wouldn't have much motivation to go. Mm-hmm. In most American churches, the weekend worship has become the front door of the church. And here's what I'm talking about. Think about how people come into the church. In the 50s and in the 60s, people came into the church through the Sunday school. Today, people come into the church through the worship service, primarily. Average worship attendance, according to the Southern Baptist Convention, far outpaces average Sunday school attendance, and the gap has been getting wider and wider since the 1970s. And I know that's true. I know it's true because I know of churches that I've been involved in where we had tremendous Sunday school attendance and classes that were really full all the time. And it was really a phenomenon to see these people leave church after Sunday school and not stay for worship many times. But every Sunday they were faithful to Sunday school. And now it's been a flip-flop. We get people who come into worship, but they don't come for Sunday school. It's believed that less than 1 out of 6 church members attend Sunday school ever. Less than 1 in 6 ever attend Sunday school. And so, go ahead and move forward there. Okay. My notes aren't as good as I was hoping right here. So talking about the front door. The front door is the worship of the church for the most part nowadays. And the issue for rethinking has little to do with style, with the so-called worship wars, the contemporary versus the traditional and all that. Different churches should use different styles of worship. And that may include some modern things as well as some traditional things. But rethinking worship has more to do with the assumptions behind the worship experience than it does with the experience itself. And so, seeker sensitivity is one of those assumptions. People often say, this is our church, like it or leave it. You want to come? Come on and join us. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. But if you do like it, stay. We'd love for you to be here. Now, I'm not saying that that's said in here, but I've heard it in other churches. And it's a common train of thought for many church people. Like us or leave us. It's that simple. If you don't like us, go on. Sure, there's a church out there that you'll be happy in. Instead of wondering if we are truly trying to meet the needs of those who are seeking out God and a relationship with Him. How open are we to the seeker? And I'm not talking about a full seeker service, which I believe is a good thing in many contexts. But I'm just talking about when it comes to people who come into the church who for whom it's new. How do we respond to them? Because they're going to come in through the worship service. They're going to come in through the front door. One of the ways we've done a couple of things with the front doors literally have changed out there. The glass doors. They're a lot more inviting. And there's still work to be done around the door, of course, but they're a lot more inviting than they were. And when you walk in, we have a welcome center there. And the idea and the goal is to have somebody at that welcome center when people start coming in. Unfortunately, we're still yet to really grasp that and have people who are committed to being there every Sunday morning and to be there when people start coming in. Are we doing greeters now? Well, we do have greeters. We have greeters around, but I mean somebody there to really to be right there behind that counter to answer any questions, because that's what people are looking for. People, you might shake my hand when I walk in the door, but that doesn't tell me really a lot about you. But if you're standing behind a desk that says information, then I know I can go to you if I need to know where the restroom is, if I'd like, to find out where the nursery is. And we have Bibles there. We have gift bags that we're giving people at the end of the service if they turn in a visitor card, and that's been somewhat helpful to be able to do that. But then we have to have people out there after the service to cover that, and that's not always. Billy's real good at it because he's taken that on as part of the outreach. But like right now, this morning at least, he was having to count because it was his Sunday to count. So we had to pull somebody from back there and I can't even, I think Mike did it this morning, yeah, to actually cover that, because we had people here who were guests who actually turned in cards. So that's important to do things like that. That's being seeker sensitive in my book. That is being available to answer questions. It's giving people instructions, because, I mean, people want to know, where's the bathroom and where's the nursery? You know? And we need to tell them that, and by the way, if you didn't know this, you need to know this yourself. When you get up to go to the bathroom or the nursery, you need to go this way, because the doors get locked right after church starts. And that's a security feature. So if you go out the door, you're not going to be able to get back in unless you got a key. So that's why, and people say, well, I don't want to walk down the aisle and, you know, walk down in front of everybody in the church. People are not staring at you, okay? Just go on and go back there and do what you need to do, because we want everyone to be safe here in church. But we want to be seeker sensitive in those regards.
I'm kind of stuck on the language part that you mentioned first.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't understand what's going on, and for some reason we're not being, explicit about things,
Mm-hmm.
that's, to me, that, I just got stuck on that.
Mm-hmm. I pastored a church in Raleigh that was real close to the university, and we had a lot of professors there that and deans and different administrators that were right there in the church. And I was a little intimidated, preaching to them, and so I thought at times, I really need to find some big words and use some important words and things like that. And what I found, and I had a good friend who told me, he said, look, they may be experts at a lot of things, but you're the expert here when it comes to what you're trying to do as pastor. So what I learned was that those people needed me to be plain with them as well as someone off the street. And if I spent my time catering to try to use a vocabulary that astonished them, then I was going to miss out on somebody who really needed to know what I was talking about. And what I found, again, is that most of these people that was not them anyway. I mean, people made fun of us being moo you anyway, so we were... Hey, it was the same thing at Clemson, right? Clemson and State, the two moo you, so... No, I do try to be very conscious of using language that people understand. And even sometimes on Sunday nights it's easier. On Wednesday nights it's easier. On Sunday mornings, I have to remember that there are a lot of people who maybe have never heard of the atonement, or who maybe have never heard of what some of these groups are that, when you start using language to give announcements even. Something as simple as that. And so we need to be able to be plain and be understood. Because what we're saying is it's not very important if it's not being understood. Might as well go home.
Do we try to do that too, like a 5th grade level or 6th grade level sometimes? Do we try to do it at a certain, like a 5th grader or 4th grader come to stand it? I'm just asking the question.
I don't know what a 5th grader versus a 4th grader understands, so I don't know. But yeah, again, not dumb it down, but just make it plain. Make it plain.
Plain spoken generally works better.
Yeah. Who was the best at? Billy Graham. Billy Graham, as many people as he preached to and won for the Lord, he was very plain spoken. He was easy to understand.
He didn't fill his messages with jokes and
Right.
things to keep people's attention.
Yeah, just very clear, very straightforward. Exactly. Now, the reason I bring all this up, and the seeker sensitivity, imagine that you went to a different country and you were invited to a worship service of a different religion where they worshiped a very different God, one that you didn't know anything about, and you went there. And not only would you not be drawn to that religion, which is not what I'm suggesting should happen, but you would not even understand what was going on unless people made it clear. That's the way a lot of people are coming into our churches. They've never been, it's a foreign thing to them. And more millennials particularly have never been exposed to church. They've never, we have a whole generation that we lost when we said, you don't have to go to church, to our children, basically. That's not, I don't mean to be completely generalized, but that's, in a lot of ways, what's happened. But if you go to a place where you're not familiar, think about that. You're worshiping there, or you're there for worship. You don't want to have to sing anything. You don't want to have to say anything. You don't want to have to give anything. You don't want to have to speak to anybody. These are things that make you uncomfortable. Don't want to do anything really. But then when it comes to our church, we've got to remember there are a lot of people who come in, and the first thing we do is we want all of our visitors to stand up this morning. Stand up. Now everybody go shake their hands. How does that make them feel? It's very intimidating, scary even. It could make them angry. And I love the fellowship time. I love, getting up, shaking hands with each other and stuff like that. I had a guy, actually, a couple that came to visit a church one time, and they stopped coming. And I just went to them because I knew them from local business, and I said, we were glad that you came to church, and what made you stop coming? They said, you want us to be honest? Absolutely, I want you to be honest. What made you stop coming? It's when everybody would get up and start shaking hands with each other. And people were hugging each other, and people were telling stories and talking and catching up. Said, we didn't know a lot of those people. We didn't feel comfortable. And we didn't like answering all those questions. Where do you live? What do you do? It just really was offensive to them. And I thought about it, and I could see that. I could see it. So growing in seeker sensitivity has nothing to do with devaluing authentic worship. It can just be something as simple as, if somebody doesn't have a Bible to take home with them, we'll give them one out there at the Welcome Center. It can be something as simple as giving them a little notepad to take notes in. It can be something as simple as giving them a map of the church facilities so they'll know where the restrooms are, where the nursery is. It's a long way to the nursery from here. And people who come in that door have no idea what's back here. They don't know how to get there. So we don't change the message of the church. Being sensitive, seeker-sensitive is not about changing the message of the church, but what White suggests is it's about changing the manners of the church, of just being more aware and more intentional. The second part of opening the front door has to do with cultural relevance. And this idea can be applied to worship. It can be applied to how we receive the offering. It can be applied to how Jesus taught in spirit and in truth. And he said that we must worship in spirit and in truth. And sometimes our worship becomes more about our likes and our dislikes. Sometimes our worship, have you ever heard it? I just don't like that kind of music. Never heard that one, have you, Logan? I just don't like that kind of music. I just don't like the way that person dresses. I just don't like such and such, how they behave. I just don't like people talking about money in church. Jesus talked about money more than he did anything. Literally. The irony is that many of our traditions that may now be irrelevant began in an effort to become relevant. What I'm saying is, go back to the 19th century. Some of the things that churches maybe grasped then were very important and relevant for the 19th century. But now, the world has passed us by. The world has left us. And I'm not saying we're to be of the world. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the technology. I'm talking about being able to reach people. Why do most churches worship at 11 a.m.? Who knows? Why do most churches have worship on Sunday morning, 11 a.m.? Because of the milking schedule of the cows. Gave you time to get the cows milked, and then you could go to church. That was why 11 o'clock just happened to be a good time. But you think about it. If we're meeting at 11 o'clock to accommodate the milking schedule, how many of us are out there milking cows every Sunday morning? Not many of us. And are we missing opportunities for people to worship? Now, I'm not talking about accommodating the world, but that's why 11 o'clock was chosen. You know, because if you're saying, are you suggesting we should change the time of worship? I'm not making that as a motion or anything tonight. I'm just saying that we need to consider that. We need to consider if 11 o'clock Sunday morning is not the best time to worship, when is? And if we were to do that, we would not be accommodating the world. We're accommodating them now, just from a few centuries back with the milking schedule, or a few decades even around here possibly. What about the great hymns? The great hymns we love to sing, the hymns of Martin Luther and of Wesley, that to many people today seem so prudish and so stuffy. What were they written to, Logan? The tunes that most of Charles Wesley and Martin Luther's hymns were written to were barroom tunes from their day. They took the theology, the wording. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Logan. I just thought. They took all this and they put it to music that they were familiar with. It was contemporary music then. So those great songs of the Reformation, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." I mean, this is good theology. But a lot of people didn't like it when it was new. A lot of people were offended by it because it sounded like something from the barroom. And that's because the music was. And the musicians usually were hired from there too. So our expression, our worship needs to be culturally relevant. Here's what the Queen of England had to say about John Calvin, about the secular songwriters putting his music, his lyrics to music. She said, she called them Geneva jigs. Geneva jigs. Bach was also known to use questionable resources and then bring them into the church. Even Handel's Messiah. Handel's Messiah was considered vulgar theater. Vulgar theater by the churchmen of his day. 2% of CD sales in the United States are for classical music. 2%. Contemporary music, 90%. Maybe this gives us a clue as to why we need a blended form of worship. Why we need to not just put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, when it comes to worship. Recent research on most effective evangelistic efforts of the Southern Baptist Convention revealed that 43% have either a contemporary worship style or a blend of traditional and contemporary. Only 1.5% are classified as liturgical. But rethinking worship in light of cultural relevance goes far beyond that. I like liturgical worship, but it's not what people would be drawn to for the most part. For somebody that has studied worship, it's pretty intriguing. But it is basically the formality, the reading and the reciting and the very stuffy stuff. I mean, that's good stuff to me, but it's not what I want every Sunday. Okay, I enjoy it, but it's not what I want all the time. But our music, our terminology, often lends itself more to liturgical style of worship, and only 1.5% of American Southern Baptist churches practice that kind of worship. So we want to open the front door by being seeker-sensitive and culturally relevant. And I think being culturally relevant also includes things like being a part of having a preschool available, having an after-school program perhaps available, having a softball team, having picnics, doing fellowship things. I think that makes us culturally relevant because people are looking for a safe place to do those kinds of things. People are looking for a place where they can trust people to watch their children, for places where they can have clean fun with other adults, where they can love and be loved. Theologian, you can go forward there. Austin, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Theologian Millard Erickson, building on the insights of William Horner, offered this distinction in the use of the terms translation versus transformation. Every generation must translate the gospel into its unique cultural context. Transformation of the message must be avoided at all costs. Translation is essential for a winsome and compelling presentation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Donald Husted was a former organist for the Billy Graham Crusades. Here's what he said. Jesus did not give any instructions about what words or musical sounds or gestures or artwork should speak for us and to us. Evidently, he and the Apostle Paul understood that modes of expression vary according to culture. And so this Billy Graham, who had George Beverly Shea, who sang and was so beautiful, and had Kate Smith and different ones from way back, and in his later years had Toby Mac, and he had people that many Christians didn't want to see at a Billy Graham crusade because they said, this is disrespectful, this music is too contemporary, it's too loud, it's too whatever. And what Billy Graham realized was that over the years, the tastes of people change. The types of people that were coming to his service, he wanted to be culturally relevant to them. And so he still had Bev Shea singing, but he also had Johnny Cash. and Charlie Daniels and other Christian singers who happen to be Christian, and rappers like Toby Mac. It's just really amazing. If the act of worship is the expression of love and honor and praise to God, then it must be genuine and heartfelt. It must be meant. The more worship authentically reflects how a person naturally expresses those commitments and emotions, the more God-honoring it becomes. This is the heart of rethinking worship. For what is meaningful to one person may not be meaningful to another, particularly as vocabulary and style change over time.